Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543.
And I am Ana Ávila. Welcome to This Integrated Life, a podcast for those who seek to engage with life's biggest questions using the tools of the sciences with theology. Welcome, Justin. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing all right. How are you, Ana?
I'm good. I'm good. Trying to wake up with my coffee.
Oh, yes, it's
Um,
2 hours earlier for you.
yes, but I should be up. I should be up by now. So I hope this conversation, I'm sure it's going to be very fun and engaging and it's going to wake me up. Please don't
I,
make me fall asleep,
I'll do
Justin.
my best.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to talk about the other side of integration. For the last few episodes, we've been talking about your journey as a scientist who's also a Christian. And then we talked a little bit about how integration looks for scientists who are religious, specifically Christian. And I thought today would be a good day to talk about the other side of things. How about integration for pastors or theologians or even regular churchgoers who want to know more about what the sciences have to offer to their faith or to their ministry work and things like that? How do you feel
Okay.
about that?
Sure, we can talk about that.
Nice. What have you heard about integration on the other side of things for theologians, of pastors? Have you seen religious people interested in integration, or it's something that just doesn't come up?
Um, I think mostly it doesn't come up.
Mm.
Every once in a while, I've experienced little glimpses of what you're calling integration from the other side. So, when I lived in the Los Angeles area, the church that we went to there would sometimes appropriately sort of bring scientific findings into sermons, for instance, and use those as a springboard to make points about the gospel or whatever it is that. And some of those were interesting and well done. So there were little glimpses there. Uh, I have also witnessed in churches kind of the opposite, which is and this is rarer, fortunately, but at least rarer in the churches I've been a part of. But I remember visiting a church once where the one of the pastors was almost ruthlessly going after like geological signs in the national parks. He was strangely he was reflecting on having taken the youth on this like trip to the national parks. I think it was
Mm.
in Utah or something like that. A bus trip, beautiful part of the United States. If you've never been there, there are all these national parks in Utah, Colorado, up into Wyoming and stuff, and it's amazing, amazingly stunning beauty through there. But there are little informational signs about rock formations and how many, millions of years old they are. And of course, for him as a young earth creationist, that was an attack on the Christian faith. And he wasn't shy about saying, this is basically conspiratorial lies
Mm.
that are, dotted all over the national parks. Well, you wouldn't call that integration, but it's certainly bringing
Yeah.
scientific issues into a church context in a negative way in those cases. So I've seen a little bit of both sides, at least from up front, from the pulpit.
Yeah.
How
And
about
do you?
you?
Oh, well, you said the negative side of integration would was less common for you. Yeah, here in Latin America, I think it's more common to see this war as if science is something that is trying to take the place of religion in people's lives. And of course, for some people, we need to believe something. Um, and and some people do make science a sort of idol, we'd say, in the Christian tradition. Um, but I think a lot of religious leaders in Latin America, at least, are a bit um, feeling like they need to defend their faith against science a little bit too much, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't think I've ever seen good positive integration. So we have a lot to learn.
Oh, know.
And what do you think? Do you think it's equally important? Because we talked before about how everyone has a worldview, everyone has some sort of faith they're basing their lives on, even though most people don't realize it, maybe. Um, do you feel that is equally important on the other side of things to bring science to the church or the pulpit or the life of the everyday Christian?
No, I don't think it's equally important. Look, as much as I'm a big fan of the sciences, and I think they're really good tools for us that God has given us, and that my career has mostly involved the sciences in one way or another. No, I don't think there's an equivalence there. I think this is one of the mistakes that we can slip into when we talk about. You often see this in organizations or individuals who, identify themselves as, well, I do science and religion, or I do faith and science, or I do Christianity and science, or whatever it is. They talk as if it's two equal things. We need to put these things in dialogue. And they're like, no, I'm uncomfortable with that metaphor, because our Christian faith is an all-encompassing, life-giving, orienting kind of thing. It's the whole enchilada, as we would appropriate.
Yeah, we don't say that.
We would appropriate and say, as a matter of speech, it's the whole enchilada. It's the whole thing. And the sciences at best are a little bit of extra sauce you might put on the enchilada. But you can have the enchilada without the sauce.
Yeah.
The sauce without the enchilada is just silly. It doesn't even make sense. Like, really? You're going to lick sauce off a plate? Okay, I've gone too far with the metaphor, but it doesn't have anything to hang on to. So there's not an equivalence there. What we call the sciences, modern sciences, right, were invented almost 500 years ago, basically, in one part of the world, in one historical and cultural context. And so for thousands of years, people got along without the sciences. And presumably people who were, God's people and Christ followers, they did just fine without the sciences. Okay, so is it absolutely essential, or, to think about the integration going that way? Well, no, it's not absolutely essential in that respect. Now, times have changed, and I do think it is the responsibility of the church to be responsive to the changing cultural environments that we find ourselves in as God's people. If we are going to be witnesses in the world for Christ, we need to understand that world that we're witnessing to. So there's that part. But there's also the reality of, and these sure seem like tools that have sprung out of our Christian intellectual traditions, as I've said, as good gifts from God in order to address the issues of the contemporary world. So God gives us tools that we need. Let me use a metaphor, since I love metaphors. I think they help. Think about integrating music into the church. That's actually an area of, because I know you sing, you do music.
A little bit.
I do. You're a good singer. Don't say a little bit. You lead worship at your church and everything. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it happen. But the church throughout its history has tried to figure out, well, how do we incorporate different forms of music into the life of the church? And in two respects. One is the church as a corporate body. Are we going to sing worship together? Are we going to chant worship together? Which instruments are okay and which ones aren't? Which types of music are and aren't okay? All that's still going on today. Those negotiations. Think of that as integrating music into that, the corporate body of the church, but also, and the lives of individuals in the church. To what extent should Christians be enthusiastic about investing in the musical skills of their children? Are themselves? Should we practice musical instruments? Should we practice singing? Should we try to become better musically? Those are all legitimate questions, I think. I don't think they're of course not as fraught in the same way as the discussions around the sciences, but they are legitimate questions. To what degree should music have priority in our worship, in our lives? What kind of music should we be consuming? What kind of music should we stay away from?
Yeah.
Right? These are open, live questions. I think there are parallels then with, well, what should we be doing with I picked on music because it's a part of culture. Music changes from time to time and place to place. The particular instruments that are being used, the particular way that lyrics are written, the genres of music, they change over time and place. And the church is constantly negotiating, okay, how do we respond to these different kinds of music? Is contemporary music okay? Should there be a drum? Those are the kinds of questions that get asked, right? And they've been asked for hundreds of years, as far as I can tell. Likewise, we would ask the same things about language, about food, about clothing. There are all kinds of, whatever the cultural issue is, the church needs to figure out how to integrate it in order to be Christ's witness in that cultural space, in that historical time. We constantly navigate these things in our own lives and then in our corporate worship and our corporate mission. Well, the sciences are part of that. And science spawned technology are now part of the culture we live in. And so the church, I think, whereas is it absolutely essential to our Christian faith to be thoughtful about how the sciences fit? Well, no. Is it has it risen to the level of a responsibility for us to take seriously and to be thoughtful about? Well, now I think we're starting to get into, yeah, it is, at least in many contexts. Not every church in all parts of the world is it quite so critical. But certainly churches that are operating in major urban settings in most countries of the world now, well, we're dealing with an increasing number of scientists and what I call science-y people. So they may not be doing science, but they're science-attracted people, or they work in science-derived fields like technological fields, medicine, even nursing, dentistry. These are science-adjacent kinds of fields. And those are the people that the church is supposed to be ministering to. Well, so being thoughtful about the space they work and live in is important for the church. So I think in those respects, thinking about integration from the other side is really important, even if there's not that same equivalency of urgency, if you follow my argument.
I agree. And I think it's good for us science-y people to be mindful about how we can make science a bigger deal than it is sometimes. Like we think it's the most important thing in the world, ignoring the fact that we haven't always had science, and that's okay. We love science. We think it's important, and we're grateful we have it now. But yeah, I think we need to put it in its proper place. Something I do think is essential, critical, is more on the philosophical side of science, the fact of where we can get truth from, because I think that's where religious people get a little bit suspicious about science. A lot of science-y people who are not believers think that only through science we could get to truth. So Christians feel threatened by that. And then they feel the pull to say, oh, no, science can't tell us anything. And if it seems to be saying whatever that is seems to be a little bit against what we believe, then it's lies and conspiracy. And so I think the truth conversation is the conversation that is most important between science and the theology or religion. I don't know how you feel about that.
I do think that's I don't know if I'm ready to make that the most important conversation, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I do think it's an important one. So I'll partially affirm what you're saying there. Well, the reason why I don't think it's the most important is because the most important question, as far as I can tell, is how we, the church, treat people.
Mm.
The people are more important than ideas.
Sure.
And are we loving people well? And that includes sciencey people. So is the church a place that is a hospitable environment for sciencey Christ followers? It better be, or we're missing part of what church is supposed to be. And so that, I think, is, for me, the highest priority issue is almost this sort of hierarchy of holiness within the church. Are we putting sciencey people sort of in a lesser position because they work in these areas? That's not a gospel-centered church that does that, it seems to me. Or at least it's failing in some important respects. We can come back to that one, but that's my number one. But I agree with you that the truth issue is important. But interestingly, I think it's easily addressed too.
How?
And you
fix
probably,
everything, please.
the magic wand. I can snap my fingers. Well, first, there's the recognition that you are absolutely right. There are some sciencey people out there who, especially some of these popularizers of the sciences, public communicators about sciences, who seem to be so invested in being evangelists for science, capital S, that they ridiculously overstate things.
Yeah.
Like, it's the only way we can really know anything.
Yeah.
And you're right. Occasionally they say this stuff, but most scientists that I know, that I've lived with, worked with, interacted with, even if they might, only a small percentage of them say that sort of thing. And those that do, it's pretty easy to get them to recant that and go, well, yeah, okay, I don't really mean it.
Yeah.
And usually all you have to do is something like, there are lots of ways to do this. One is, so you're telling me, like this thing you're calling science, that is so important, is so valuable that we have to preserve it, work really hard to protect it. It was invented at some point in history, right? 500 years ago or something like that. Well, sure. So before that, nobody knew anything. Is that what you're saying? Really?
Really?
And they'd go, well, no, of course not. Okay, so then there are things we know without science, right? Yeah, okay. Or, that's sort of the historical nerdy thing, but there's a more personal thing, which is the kind of, so you can't know anything without science, huh? Who is your mother? Do you know who your mother is?
To the lab.
Yeah. Whoa, I better go study this. I think you really know, for most of us, who our mother is.
Yeah.
And you didn't use science to know that, or what you had for breakfast, or what you ate for dinner last night, and you didn't use science to figure that out either. So let's be honest, most of the time, there's tons of stuff we know that we reasonably can believe that doesn't require the sciences at all. It's just absurd to say that. And it's not hard to show most scientists that it is absurd. Well, like I said, I don't think most.
Then people say, well, yeah, of course, you can know things without science, but the important things, or the way we make decisions about what to do in the world, can only be done through science if you want to do it well, or things like that.
Well, yeah, that was pretty easy to dismantle too, because the sciences never tell us what to do in the world. They describe how things might go in the world, or at least have gone in the world, but they don't tell us how we ought to do things in the world. They've never done that. They've never pretended to do that. That's putting too big a burden on the sciences. And again, depending on who you're talking to, address them where they live. So you use science to decide who to marry? No, you didn't. You used science to decide to become a scientist? No, you didn't. Did you use science to decide that murdering your mother in her sleep is a really bad thing? No. It turns out that actually most of the really important stuff that gets us through life, we don't use sciences to decide at all. Even simple, trivial things like what were you going to wear today? Unless you're a very special person, you probably did not use science to decide that.
And by special, we don't mean special.
We mean special in a special way. It's just it's absurd to put that burden on the sciences, and I put it that way because it's going to break under that. That's not what the sciences are for. The sciences are really good tools for certain types of ways of making discoveries about the world and gaining deeper understanding, but not about what we should be doing, decision making, the oughts of life, our morals, the sort of personal decision making that that are really one-off events, as we say. It's just one-time events in our lives. The most important things in life, those are not scientific decisions. They may be science informed if we let them be at moments. Most of the time, they're just not. And we're kidding ourselves if we think they are. I'll add, a lot of people will quickly sort of rush to the defense of the sciences by pointing to our technologies, like the technology we're using right now to talk to each other. Look, we don't get all of these cool technologies without the sciences. Okay, many of them we don't. Are they strictly speaking necessary? Well, no. Again, human beings survived for a long time before the sciences, developing things like clothing and tools and agricultural practices. And heck, they, cultivated domesticated plants and animals without sciences. Just by trial and error, you can get a lot of things done. And that's not science either. So we can be science enthusiasts and don't have to overstate the case to a ridiculous point. On the other side, so that's the science enthusiasts who think this is the only way to know stuff. Yeah. But you mentioned the people who react against that and say, well, we don't need it at all. Well, right, we don't need the sciences at all for most of life. But it doesn't follow from that we shouldn't be thoughtful, judicious, prudent consumers and users of the sciences. We don't need clothes at all in a lot of places. You live in the tropics, strictly speaking, you don't need clothes, but we wear them.
Yeah.
We don't need music, but we do music. There are lots of things we don't, strictly speaking, need, but that doesn't mean they aren't good things when they're used appropriately and in the right context. And so I think that's the responsibility that the church has around science integration, to say, well, what are the right contexts and what's the appropriate way to use these good tools that God has given us and to take care of those tools well, because they can be powerful tools. I've compared it to something like this too. The Olympics have just happened.
Yes.
The usual kinds of very impressive athletic feats and world records and, being set and all of this other stuff. And part of the reason why we see, Olympics after Olympics, more world records breaking, is because of new training techniques, new insights as far as that goes. Sports science, actually, and sports psychology, improving the performance of athletes. New fabrics in their uniforms, or their like the swimming is one of these where world records have gone crazy, right? Where over the last, 20, 30 years, the depth of the pool changes how fast people swim, the temperature of the water, what kind of swimsuit they're wearing. All of these different things have contributed to better and better performance. Does that mean people couldn't swim very well before all of these new technologies? Well, no, they could swim great. But now, in the world that we're living in, if you want to compete at that level, you need to take seriously these, the nutrition, the training techniques, all of these different things to perform at your best. So my analogy then might be something like this. For the church to perform at its best, strictly speaking, does it need the sciences? No. But if we're given the sciences as tools to improve the way that we do the work of the church, that we live into and participate in God's kingdom, that we can better cultivate fruit of the Spirit, that we can better reach the whole world for Christ. It would seem like silly to just say, no, we got this. Keep your silly and fancy tools to yourself. We'll let the rest of the world use these tools, but we won't. Like, really? I know that's not a real strong argument, but you sort of see where I'm going with that.
Yeah. So using these tools, how do you see them changing a church or a ministry or the life of the Christian for the better? How does it look to be an integrated pastor, theologian, church, Christian person versus not being one?
That is a tough question. I'll give some gestures in some directions I think are promising, but the truth is we haven't explored this. We, Christ followers, have not explored this well enough, and we need to figure it out, I think. So mostly that's the message, is more of us need to get into this space and do better. But here are my sort of gestures in the direction. Starting point is back to what I said was the priority, and that is the people. A church, an integrated church is going to be a church that knows how to welcome in sciencey people, how to equip them and disciple them, how to grow them in Christ, and to then deploy them into kingdom activities, just like with anybody else. But why am I sort of picking out the sciencey people? Because of a lot of sciencey people don't feel welcome in churches. A lot of sciencey people, even if they feel sort of welcome, like, oh yeah, nobody said I couldn't come in, and they said good morning to me, the church is not necessarily discipling them in a way that matches who they are in terms of their motivations, the way they think, their specific skill set. There's some research out there suggesting that people from science professions are, well, they're strange compared to everybody else in some ways that are not going to surprise most people who understand the sciences. And that is whether they've gravitated there because of inborn or early developing kinds of predispositions, or they've been trained up. One way or the other, sciencey people tend to be more attracted to discovery as opposed to, just tell me what we've always done, then I'm satisfied, right? Tradition, they tend to not be real fond of tradition. They tend to be more fond of discovery, of evidence. Show me the evidence. Now, it could be biblical evidence. It could be evidence in life experiences, but show me the evidence. Don't just say things. Sciencey people, we've been trained up to be suspicious of anecdotes. So don't just tell me a story. That's
Says the person who uses metaphors and analogies.
They're fine for rhetoric, but if you're making a factual claim about the world, you better be able to back it up with some evidence.
Yeah, of course.
And the evidence isn't just, well, I knew this guy once. Who? And then you tell a story. But pastors do this all the time, right? And it's like, I was in the grocery store and I ran into my friend Bob, and Bob said, and you're like, that's funny. I heard the same story from another pastor at another church 200 miles away. You got this from a book. Stop it.
Oh, that's horrible. See, this is why I still believe truth is higher. Because I don't mean truth just in the get the facts things and the proper theology and stuff. I just think that if we put truth as our highest value, and of course we as Christians believe truth comes from the truth with capital T, who's a person, who's love. So I think truth is going to demand us to love people well, because God is truth and God is love. So, and is going to put our church in a disposition of humbleness and of engaging with facts, even though they challenge our preconceptions of the world and stuff. And that's going to create a welcoming environment for sciencey people. So I don't know.
That sounded really nice, and I like that. So
just say I'm right, Justin.
Well, but I could take everything you just said and say, yeah, but a loving church is also going to seek truth, because that's how we're going to love these people well. And we can both be right on this one, I think.
Okay,
fine. You're right. We should be a people committed to truth. But notice we speak the truth in love. So
there's a reason why Scripture ties those two concepts together. So maybe, we're both right.
Okay, we'd be both right on this. I guess my reaction to it is I don't want to burden church leaders of various sorts, whether they're clergy or not, or anybody else in the church, with I have to figure everything out. I have to get it right first. No, you have to love first. And let that love motivate you then to figure out the things that really matter. So hence the priority thing.
Sorry,
but yes, it's absolutely. Please do interrupt, because these are important issues. And I think we can reasonably disagree on some of these, because we're talking about differences in emphasis, and we do want it all. We want to be truth aimed, but we want to be love motivated. The sciencey people are strange. They need a different kind of discipling than, say, artsy people in general, who might need a different kind of discipling than, I don't know, agrarians, farmers, I don't know, practical people. Those sciences kind of straddle that. They're the sort of the practical end scientists, more the engineer types of sciencey people. And then they're the theoretical physics, that side of things and stuff. But we would want that. I think those who are in the business of pastoring or spiritually discipling or otherwise trying to encourage and cultivate fruit of the Spirit in people in churches should be interested in caring for particular individuals, as opposed to, pretty much everybody's the same and we'll hit them with this. It doesn't work. Which then leads to, so there's the welcome the sciencey people in, bring them in, help them feel at home, help them grow in their relationship with Christ, in their reflecting Christ in the world, help them find their place in God's kingdom in the world, and equip them and deploy them to do that. And then they are going to figure out how they can contribute best to the mission of the church. And that solves the second part of the problem. And why I'm prioritizing that kind of discipleship side of things over the figure out all of the how to bring the sciences in. Well, no, they're going to figure out how to bring the sciences into the particular church that they're part of. Now, do I have some suspicions about how you do that? Well, sure. We Blueprint 1543 hosted an event a bit over a year ago, about a year and a half ago now, that brought together a bunch of psychological scientists who have been doing work that is relevant to various forms of Christian ministry, as well as other kinds of religious and spiritual practices and so forth. And just to sort of compare notes and learn from each other. And we had some participants there who were in this event who are also pastors. And I think I can say it's okay that John Ortberg was one of the participants. And of late, so John Ortberg was a pastor in Silicon Valley, so one of the big tech centers of the world, and so had lots of sciencey people in his congregation. And interestingly, John has a doctorate in psychology, as well as his Master of Divinity. So he thinks like a psychological scientist more than most pastors. But he brought up a really important challenge for those of us there, and that was, look, churches need a theory of change, is the way he put it. A theory of change mean, how, and what he had in mind there was, how do we, the church, help cultivate spiritual fruit in people? How do we bring about spiritual maturity in Christians? We don't want somebody to receive Jesus when they are 20 years old, join the church, be regular attenders every Sunday, join a small group, read their Bible, pray regularly, and 40 years later be the same person. We want a transformation to take place. Well, what activities are we know this is the work of the Holy Spirit, but we also know that the Holy Spirit invites us to be God's hands and feet in the world, to be working, to be preparing the soil. We sometimes use metaphors like that, to be otherwise creating the conditions that help spiritual growth. Well, what's our theory of change, of those activities we should be doing that will best bring about spiritual growth in people? And then can we turn to the relevant sciences that help us identify whether, first of all, whether we are growing in the way that we say we should? So there's an assessment issue, a measurement issue. And then there are also tools out there. So there are lots of psychologists now, many of them are Christ followers, who have been studying things like, how do we grow patience? How do we grow self-control? How do we become more hopeful? How do we become kinder? How do we forgive better? How do we practice and make part of us a spirit of gratitude? Well, these are Christian virtues that we do want to see cultivated. Many of them are captured in the fruit of the Spirit, right? That we're supposed to be growing in ourselves. Well, there are tools being developed that look like they actually help. They help us grow in these areas. Well, are churches using those tools? Or are they falling back on what we've been doing for a couple of thousand years? That's not to say these are bad things, but if all we've got up our sleeve is, well, read your Bible, pray daily. Like, well, those are good things, but is it working? If it isn't, why not? Oh, sure, it's working. I can tell you a story about Bob who... Like, no. Don't tell me a story about Bob. Anecdotes is not enough evidence. Okay. We should be characterized, right? Does the church, I sometimes hear passionate Christ followers say things like this. Yeah, we're doing well. Okay. Look, people who are regular church attenders, they tend to be happier, healthier, more generous, more grateful, and even live longer. There's lots of psychology of religion research that actually backs up. There's some real positive things that are associated with being regular church participators. It seems to be doing some good work in people's lives. And yet, these are not big effect sizes, as we would say in the sciences. So one way to put it is, yeah, we're doing something, but why aren't we doing better? Why is it that so many churches seem to leave? Well, lots of people are leaving churches saying, wow, that was a toxic environment. So many people are spending their lives in churches going, it just didn't do anything for me. I love Jesus, but that church, or wow, why is it that on so many other measures, Christians who are regular churchgoers don't look really any different than the culture around them? What's that about? Well, I think here we've got an opportunity to use these new tools of the sciences, especially the human sciences, to sort of start nudging us in those directions. And to say, well, here are some tools that the church can sort of inspect and use and decide, where do these fit into the life of the church? Like these gratitude interventions that Bob Emmons and some of his colleagues have developed, or forgiveness practices that Ev Worthington and his colleagues have researched so heavily and developed out, that really seem to be helping people in those areas, or the patience interventions that Sarah Schnitger at Baylor has been developing, or there are self-control practices. There's all of this stuff out there now. And so one way to be an integrated church is to make use of these science developed tools, again, in appropriate ways, contextualize in the right way for the life of the church, and letting those be part of our discipleship practices, instead of, frankly, at least in American churches, what I typically see is we're going to tell you over and over again how important it is for you to be patient, to be kind, to be self-controlled, to be hopeful, to be loving, to be joyful. We're going to tell you about it. We're going to read Bible passages about it. We're going to tell you about it. We're going to tell you about it. And then we're going to tell you about it. And then we're going to tell you you should go and pray about it. And ask that God just gives it to you. That's about how much help we're going to give you in your discipleship. Well, that's not working. That's not a good, as Ortberg said, theory of change. It's sure not showing the kind of evidence, the kind of fruit that we would hope to be harvesting off of these trees here. So, yes, it sounds like a criticism of the church, but it's also hopeful, right? It's constructive kind of criticism, I hope. The idea is, I know that most good churches want to see this kind of stuff. Yeah. It's part of the mission. And I don't doubt that the leadership of these churches really want to bring this about. What I doubt is that they're making best use of a lot of the tools that really are available nowadays.
And these tools don't have to be scary. I know a little bit about them, but from what I see, they're simply taking us back to a model of living and practicing and actually doing the things we say we need to be doing. Like in churches, as you said, the emphasis is in teaching and in just telling you what you should do, but we are missing the modeling side of things. Okay, how does it look? Or what do I do? Can you walk with me through this forgiveness or through this gratitude? And most of these tools are simply interventions, which are very simple, that are proven to be effective to help us grow in humility or in forgiveness or in gratitude. So it's not scary. It's just simply living what we preach, I think.
Yeah. And actually, if I can, if I may, I mean, in some ways, you're doing the same kind of thing in the kind of work that you've been doing in the books you've been writing, where you're trying to help people rethink, for instance, obstacles in their life toward cultivating the kind of abundant life that Jesus wants for us, right? And so, like, the digital technology can be getting in the way of that kind of life. Well, you're giving people ways to think about that are scientifically informed kind of research is backing up some of the claims that you're making about screen time use, social media, and so forth, and then giving people practical steps to sort of reduce the negative impact of some of these technologies. Well, that's integrating. If churches would take that kind of stuff seriously, that's part of what we should be doing too. And this is why it's not just about teach me the stuff and I'll go away and do it on my own as an individual. The whole point of churches is that we're communities that support each other in this. Yeah. We can help create new cultures, subcultures. And I don't mean that in a way of like, oh, we've withdrawn and we've put up the walls around us. But what we have done is said, no, we're not going to live like the rest of the world. So we're going to treat digital technology differently because we know it's leading to anxiety and depression, especially in teenage girls. Yeah. We are going to treat food differently because gluttony is not honoring to God.
Yes.
We are going to treat rest differently because either running yourself down bad or not working enough, sloth. Neither of these are honoring to God, and they're not honoring to ourselves either. But we're going to create a community that actually nudges us in the right ways, that we can help each other in better sort of behavioral practices in our own lives. We can parent better. We can educate our children better, and so forth. The church is the place to live out these ideas and technologies. So that it's not just an individualistic type of thing where, well, it's up to me. It's like, it's not up to you. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is Jesus left the church to do his work. The Holy Spirit works through the life of the healthy church. So this is why it's so important for churches, I think, to be science integrated. Is it of utmost importance? No. But is there importance here? Sure, because there's so much potential to do so much good in people's lives that it's a shame that we don't.
Yeah. And to add to that, for the just average Christian who wants to follow Jesus and honor God and live in a way that is pleasing to him in this world that is so heavily influenced by science, it's good to know how the theology we believe and the science we use or we hear about in our daily lives, some people more than others, fit together just to make sense of our lives. So many of us feel we have to compartmentalize, especially when we face issues of mental health stuff, or I don't know, maybe you read a story about, or you went to the national park and you saw the millions of year things and you're like, what is this about? I just want to make sense of the things I'm looking at. A lot of people are just used to live with cognitive dissonance, and I don't think that's healthy for anyone. So start thinking differently about science and its relation to our theology. It's important to help us just live more coherently, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that kind of coherence of it's kind of sad that we have to reclaim it. I think you're right. We do. We have to reclaim this coherence. The reason I say it's sad is because it didn't have to be this way. Yeah. We've kind of created this world where we've compartmentalized things. Now we have to figure out how to reintegrate them when we shouldn't have pulled them apart in the first place. Yeah. Because the study of and understanding of the natural world, natural processes, including humans, how humans think, feel, act, behave, well, that's just doing life. I mean, that's, so as you know, because I've quoted before or referenced before, one of my favorite sort of faith sciencey integration passages of the Bible is when Solomon asked for wisdom.
Yeah.
And shortly thereafter, suddenly all people from all over the world are coming and they're marveling at his knowledge of plants and animals. What? He's not just cutting babies in half and making, judgments about, legal matters. No, that wisdom, the Old Testament sense of God's wisdom, it extends to how does the world work? What's the stuff out there? It's biological, it's geological, it's physical, it's chemical, it's all of it. It's psychological. That's God's wisdom too. Or to put it in more New Testament kind of language, it's the logos, the word through and in creation, because through everything, God created everything through the word. We read in John chapter 1. Who's that word? Jesus. So it's all created through Jesus, by and for Jesus. And so it bears his imprints. God's wisdom, God's design is infused throughout all creation. So understanding creation the best we knew how was always part of what it meant to be a Christ follower or a God follower, right? One of God's people. Now we've just got this new techniques for doing it. And you might say, well, why did we need those new techniques for the sciences, for studying the natural world? Well, again, strictly speaking, we don't. But I would say one of the reasons why they become more important is because we've become also people who have scattered all over the world, and we move around a lot. And so we can't rely on local knowledge of the stuff. So, if you're a people who've lived in the same place for thousands of years, you understand the weather there, you understand the rocks there, you understand the plants and animals there, you understand how to grow things there, and you have that local knowledge that's been cultivated over generations without the sciences. well, we don't all live in the same place for thousands of years anymore. Pretty much all of us
And
are
our
in,
places are changing so fast.
and our places are changing so fast. And so we need other tools to help us sort of figure out what's what. We can't just rely on what grandma told us, because what grandma said may have been true when she was a kid, but it's not true anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe grandma had a bad source too, because who knows? I don't know about your grandma. I mean,
we just had a conversation with some friends about pregnancy and new baby beliefs between grandmas and older generations, and it's fun. It's fun to talk about that, but yeah, not completely accurate.
well, that one's changing all the time too.
Oh yeah.
That one's funny because it changes from country to country too.
I bet. Yeah.
So I bet the rules are different in Guatemala than they are in the
Can
UK.
you go out
They're
in
different from the US.
when there's an eclipse on the States?
You got to watch out for those eclipses.
Or do you have to tie a red ribbon around your belly to protect? I don't know. Yeah.
So,
well, Justin, we're almost at the end of our conversation. What should we do? Some practical steps for pastors or leaders who want to go deeper into science and the integration. I know you started talking about love and how to better receive sciencey people in our churches. So maybe some practical steps on how to do that to close our episode.
well, yeah, I guess practical steps. First of all, keep watching, listening to us, because we're going to keep talking about these guys.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Yep, that's right. And again, in all seriousness, these are themes that at Blueprint 1543 we revisit a lot. These are things that you write on a lot too. So, yeah, keep tracking us. But a simple kind of practical step for churches, I think, and this is easier in smaller churches that pastors and elders and the rest might consider, is just start with that simple question of how are you being hospitable to sciencey people? How are them not feeling just like visiting guests that will come and go, but that they're being invited into a community? Their whole selves are being invited into a community. And it's an important question to ask, because I do hear from sciencey people too often things like, oh yeah, they were really excited for me to come to the church and immediately wanted to talk about how it is that the sciences are an evil conspiracy, or immediately tried to help me see how to understand my profession better, even though they're not from it. And so there's the, oh yes, come in so we can educate you.
So shut up and listen.
About
Step one.
about what you actually know more about than we do. So there's a lack of humility there.
Yeah.
So I think it's being inviting, welcoming, and humble. Let's start with the assumption that a scientist who is a Christ follower, which is probably why they showed up at your church, might know more about what it means to do science than you do.
Maybe.
That doesn't mean they don't need help in thinking through, all right, how does my Christian faith fuel, motivate, and inflect how I do scientific work? It doesn't mean that they don't have some things to work through, for sure. But let's start with that posture of humility, just like, again, I'll go back to that music example. If you've got a great musician, a great singer who comes into your church, the first thing you do is don't say, we are so glad you're here. There's lots of terrible music out there that you shouldn't be singing. No, that's not what people do with musicians usually. They go, oh, how can we get you on the worship team? Or how can we get you using your gifts as a musician in our church? Do we talk to scientists that way? Do we say, we're so glad you're here? How can we find ways that we can use your gifts as a scientist in the church? that would be a challenge, of a mindset challenge that I would encourage church leaders to start thinking through and being sort of warming up to.
Yeah.
So there's a practical step.
That is something that is going to change a lot of people's perception of the church. Hopefully, we all start doing a little bit more of that, a little bit more listening with humility and excitement about what sciencey people can offer our churches. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Ana. Thanks for the good questions. Thanks for the topic. It's always a fun surprise to figure out what we're going to talk about.
Yay. Well, thank you all for watching, and we hope you enjoy this time with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.